when I was 16, there was a kid in there who was 18. His father was in there, and his grandfather was in there. And they was all doing over 20. 3 generations just wiped.
We know that it's not that the children fail, it's that the system has been failing our children.
So who should be working and living and existing and offering the solutions to those traumatized young people from the community?
It's important to bring individuals from the community because they are dealing or have dealt with it directly.
Credible messenger mentors are people who have had experience in the justice system and want to get involved in trying to steer people out of the justice system because there's way too many people in the justice system.
It's kind of a stunning idea because here's the system saying
individuals who are ex-offenders are now being featured prominently as partners with justice systems to effect change in the community. This is a major paradigm shift going on.
The idea of a credible messenger has always existed.
And to me, being a credible messenger is a person that can go out there and persuade them to, change their life and want to spread the word about, listen, I've been in the streets, I've been locked up, I'm your age, you could change.
What makes me a credible messenger is that I'm impacted by the same systems. Family's been impacted.
Some people fear, like, what do you mean? Like, you're gonna put some ex-convict working with, like, my kid? And it's like, I wish I could show you, in this person's situation, like, this is exactly who you want working with your kid.
It positions credible messengers in communities that are being ravaged by crime and urban trauma and puts them in a position to be healers. It's a double impact. And that as you serve, it's redemptive and healing and restorative for you.
Our community has all the skills, the talent, but not the resource.
The center now, we have the opportunity to disseminate what we have learned about the approach, but more importantly, as a city, we can now train and cultivate and develop men and women and prepare them to reach the youth in their communities.
You could live in your hood, but you don't gotta be from your hood. You get what I'm trying to say? You don't gotta be a product of your hood.
It's about the community healing the community.
Credible messenger to me is a person that can spread the word to the youth and help, get them back on their feet because everybody falls.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today is webinar series number 1, flipping the script on what works, reimagining EBP, And today we have 2 presenters that are gonna have the heavy and in-depth discussion on what actually works. So please, let me welcome Angela Irvine and Lizette Nieves. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to go ahead and start, Tiffany? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start.
Thank you.
I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is, some of you may be dreading a conversation about research, but we, the 3 of us, all love research and having this conversation. I don't know if we could start our PowerPoint. Can everybody see it? Woohoo, Ruben. Could we start our PowerPoint? Great. So if you could go to the first slide, I'm going to start talking about research and evidence-based practice. Evidence-based practice is this category of programs and approaches to system programs and evidence collection that's been in place for a while, and it's been largely dominated by white researchers and academia as a way to perhaps impose a Western sense of rigor and control over a lot of community-based organizations, or at least it's been felt that way. And those researchers have generally not had connections to the communities that they're actually researching, that they're mining information from, and that they're imposing expensive programs onto. Please, next slide, please. Some of the problems with this approach to research is that the research is conducted in labs and psychology labs and not actually out in the real world. Sometimes there are articles that are published that are based on this collection of information from all other researchers. They're called meta-analyses, so they just collect everybody else's knowledge. The research usually includes Black and brown folks, but it rarely includes an analysis specifically looking to see if these approaches work in Black and brown communities. Next slide, please. Sometimes that research can be really, really pathologizing and focusing on negative characteristics like addiction or mental illness. And also within our field of justice, if you look at evidence-based practices, the dominant types of programs that have been stamped with this approval of evidence-based practice are psychological approaches. So there is I don't know how many of those out there have heard of the W. Haywood Burns Institute. James Bell was the founder and executive director for many years, and he had a series of convenings talking about the impact of EBPs on communities of color. And we had a bunch of researchers that had developed cognitive behavioral therapy, functional family therapy, in to talk about these approaches within communities of color. And what was interesting, and that something that I had never known, is that the intention of these programs and these approaches was to address mental health problems like anxiety and depression. They were never designed to reduce recidivism in the way that justice systems now require many jurisdictions to use evidence-based practices to somehow shape justice outcomes. And so there's this mismatch between the intention of the programs and the way that they're used to measure success. And so, next slide, please. So in the meantime, I've been a community-based evaluation researcher for several decades and have worked with dozens of organizations around the country. And one of the things I noticed, and I'm sure many of you out there are in the same boat, there's pressure by systems or foundations to do an evaluation of what you do. And so many organizations do single organization evaluations. And those can be super powerful and they help get more funding, but they are also sometimes limited because you may have low numbers in any one year, and so any statistical analysis doesn't actually show that you have positive outcomes over time. Sometimes there are critics who say, well, that's great that it worked in that one organization, but that's because the leader is a charismatic leader and it's not going to work somewhere else. And so as a researcher in the field, I noticed that while research could help some small-based, community-based organizations led by folks of color, there was something more that could be done, right? And so I reached out to a friend and colleague of mine, Malachi Garza, who is the director of the Community Justice Network for Youth at the Burns Institute. And he and I really sat down, noticed a lot of the same things, and thought, what if we pulled 10 to 12 organizations that have the same been there, done that, for us, by us, Black, brown, indigenous roots, connection to spiritual rites of passage, a lot of different, no single appointments a week, like more 24/7 approaches to serving communities. What if we pulled these organizations together and articulated the common approach that these organizations have towards their communities and developed with a survey with those organizations so that all the organizations own that data and the process, and then see what happens. And so we went ahead and did that. We pulled this network together, and instead of EBP, we call it EBP Plus. As one of the members, Albino Garcia, says, the plus is us. So if we could, if the slide guy could go through all the bullets on here. So EBP Plus is an alternative to incarceration. Next bullet, that links youth of color to their communities. Next slide, please. And if you could go through all the bullets on this slide, that would be great. The EBP Plus Collaborative has 7 active organizations that are direct serving organizations. And there are 3 chosen allies within that: the Haywood Burns Institute, Serious Policy Research, and Innovative Justice Solutions. For those, next slide is fine. The 7 active direct service organizations are Barrios Unidos in Santa Cruz, Community Connections for Youth, Lizette and Ruben, woo woo, Courage in Oakland, Fathers and Families in San Joaquin, La Placita in Albuquerque, Latino Network in Portland, POIC in Portland. So we pulled all these folks together. We came up with a common model, and I'm going to pass the baton to Lizette, because this is the point in time when she personally joined the collaborative. So she's going to tell a story about what that was like, and then share the model that we developed. Go, Lizette. Next slide, please.
My name is Lisette Nieves. I am the Deputy Director of Programs at Community Connections for Youth. And I actually joined the collaborative after we had started doing the research within the organization. And prior to that, my connection with the EBP Plus team happened via conference calls. This was like pre-COVID and pre the surge of using Zoom as a way to connect. And I have to admit that it was really difficult to make the connection between the collaborative and the research we were doing, and, integrating that process into the organization. Community Connections for Youth was part of the collaborative from the beginning, but there was, transition within our staff in terms of like who owned this process and its connection to the larger organization. I had the privilege and the honor of joining the collaborative meeting that took place in Oakland in 2019. And it was at that moment when all the organizations, all the active organizations came together. There was something about this opportunity to be part of this collaborative of like-minded organizations, with a common mission and vision, working together on a national level. It became more apparent and more obvious to me how important it was to be part of this research project and really have like an impact of what it means when communities of color come together and we build together, right? So that like, it's not just about the research of one organization in the South Bronx. It's an organization in the South Bronx. It's an organization in Oakland. It's an organization in New Mexico. And all of us undergoing this similar process at the same time and finding ways to make sure that we integrate this research into the fabric of our organizations. So it has been really powerful. And then post that collaborative, we continue to remain in communication. And then it was like COVID hit, right? So we moved our collaborative meetings to the Zoom platform. And I have to tell you, like, those collaborative meetings really fueled our energy and our effort during a really, really difficult time. It affected and impacted our ability to really like focus on the research, right? But at that moment in time, what was important, it was for us to to focus on survival, right? And being in community and supporting each other and all of the changes that we had to implement within our organization. So a lot of, it was just, again, it was like those third Thursdays every month were life-giving. And again, the ability to be able to support each other in our like-minded missions. So again, I feel super blessed to be part of this collaborative. So I want to, if you could move on to the next slide so I could tell you a little bit more about who we are as a collaborative. So first of all, we are led by system impacted leaders of color, right? Which is really important in terms of like who EBP Plus is and centering that leadership of those who have been most impacted. The next is that a lot of our staff members, have lived experience of being, system impacted, and that lived experience is valued with staff and also with the young people. Another next really important element of the EBP Plus collaborative is that we work within a social justice framework, where that social justice framework is front and center. A lot of the times our young people and our staff members are not only like doing the work and joining groups, but also and that paradigm being front and center. A core commitment to cultural beliefs and values, and making sure that those cultural beliefs and values are embedded in our organizing, in our curriculum, in our work with our families, so that our community knows that their ways are honored, seen, and incorporated into everything we do. One of the really tenets of this collaborative that really stood out to me is the importance of building relationship, not only with the youth, but with the families that extended beyond coming to a group. Building that relationship when that young person is in crisis at 2:00 in the morning, is not convenient, but sometimes crisis is not convenient, so that they know that they have this support network, that if you're in a crunch and if you're in a pinch, that you can count on this organization to help you through, crisis. The last thing is centering youth leadership and community leadership, and giving young people opportunities to shine in a very real and authentic way, but also giving them the tools to be able to step into those leadership roles. It's not like, I'm gonna throw you in front of a camera without giving you, the proper tools to prepare you for that role. And then lastly, as organizations, we have a commitment to build our own economic independence and sustainability, right? So how can we build a network, build a resource that doesn't focus so heavily on, the whim of funders, the whim of state, city, federal funding, so that we can build our own models of building financial independence and building that pool of money that is unrestricted, so that we can do what we need to do for our communities without sometimes, the heavy burden of, those reports that go out to, the funders and all of those requirements that we basically, have to prove we're doing the work. We want to let the evidence be shown in the work that we do with our families, and build our capacity. If you can go on to the next slide, please. There are 5 basic principles that we focus on when we're working with youth. You can put the first point, please. The first point is elevating youth leadership and expertise. I kind of alluded to it in terms of, in explaining what the collaborative is, but really giving young people opportunities to be in leadership. And I have expertise. Next is elevating youth resourcefulness, providing young people with the tools to advocate for themselves, to build themselves in that way. Next slide. Support youth healing, right? So really centering on healing practices, encouraging self-care, making sure that their history is reflected in the curriculum, so that, like, you know history, you know self. Elevating youth connectedness, again, that real commitment to building community and expanding their community, so that, like, they know that they can turn to their organization and their, and as well as their family. So, like, really building this very, like, cohesive community connection. And then the last thing is mobilizing youth towards forward movement, right? So, like, what does that mean for that young person? Not looking at a one-size-fits-all approach, right? So for one young person, it's focusing on, their educational goals. For another young person, it may be, they want to build their entrepreneurial skills. Another young person may want to develop a trade and build themselves up that way, and giving them those tools so that, like, they can build their own repertoire and their own, like, toolkit to take them to the next level. And those are just, like, the 5 basic elements in terms of the work that we do with youth. We elaborate on these different elements in the very first policy brief, which we will share the link at the end. But ultimately, like, in evidence-based practice, and, Angela's going to speak a little bit about what came out in the research, but that, like, evidence-based practice and coining Albino's term, the plus is us, right? Like, it's not just about the research, but it's really focusing on, like, the community that we are building, not just within our organizations, but on a national platform. So take it back to you, Angela.
Okay, and if we could just stay on this slide for a second, because I want everybody to focus on this. Especially in our field in youth justice, adult criminal justice, so often systems will say we only are going to value something that reduces recidivism or, reduces dropout rates. And it's all of these, again, really negative, pathologizing, horrible measures of success. And these leaders of color across the country said, no, we are going to develop positive, strength-based measures that actually capture what we do on a day-to-day basis. And the other thing I just want to punctuate is that, again, the existing dominant evidence-based practices many of them are focused on psychological outcomes and therapeutic outcomes, which is really important. We know that there are mental health needs for youth and their families, but there are these other social, emotional needs that young people have that direct service organizations meet on a day-to-day basis. And so we wanted to measure that and really, really complicate the conversation about what an evidence-based practice is. So you can go on to the next slide. So what we did is we developed surveys that basically created 4 or 5 questions for each of those buckets that were on the last slide. And we had the original 12 organizations collect those surveys at the beginning and the end of program participation. We also did site visits at 5 locations, and we did do some analysis of probation data that was positive, but the focus of our work is really on these surveys. So the next slide. There were positive gains in every category. So all 5 of the buckets, we showed positive gains. One of the challenges is that We collected over 500 pre-participation surveys, and many of the collaborative members, we just didn't think ahead of time about having really clear exit procedures or practices, and so we collected 150 post-participation surveys. So, so we have findings, but we don't have as many matches from the first wave as we were hoping. And so we're moving into a second chapter of research where all the participating organizations are going to be collecting more surveys, and so that we can have more matches to enhance our analysis and have a final report. But we do have a preliminary report that's coming out in about a month. One of the things that I want to mention about all of our publications is that there is not one member of the collaboration that owns the publication. So we are a collaboration. We write collaboratively. We publish collaboratively. And so in the first wave, we had a research committee that most of the organizations had at least one representative. Lisette represented CCFY. We looked at all of the data. We did several waves of research and data analysis so that everybody on that research committee understood what the findings were and how to talk about them. And at the end, we had 3 statistically significant gains. And those 3 areas were elevating youth leadership, supporting youth healing, and encouraging youth connectedness. So we also did a second wave of analysis, and we wanted to see what were the findings for Latinx youth, what were the findings for Black youth, and what were the findings for youth who had been charged with a violent crime. And the reason why that is so important is that we as advocates don't want youth who have status offenses or misdemeanors in the system at all. Like, we shouldn't even be serving them, right? Like, they need to be completely diverted and siphoned out of the system. We are going to ultimately, if we're successful in siphoning most youth out of the system, we're going to hit a point where the biggest challenge is going to be, what do we do with young people who receive the most serious charges? And so we wanted to see, okay, what is the impact of this approach on youth with violent charges? And so what you can see from these findings is that, and these are percentages, so if you look at the yellow bars, 59% of Latinx youth saw an improvement in elevating youth leadership, 63% saw an improvement in supporting youth healing, and 61% saw an improvement in encouraging youth connectedness. 43% of Black youth saw an improvement in elevating youth leadership, 39% saw an increase in supporting youth healing, 47% saw an increase in encouraging youth connectedness, and very similarly, youth with violent charges, so 42% saw an increase in leadership, 64% an increase in healing, and 40% an increase in connectedness. And so we're just really thrilled with these findings. This is really, really encouraging. We expect that we'll see improvements on the other 2 buckets as well once we have more matched surveys. And I think that that's our last slide. Our very, very last slide has a bit.ly link to the original policy brief, which lays out the model in more detail. Tiffany is welcome to send this PowerPoint out to everybody so that you have this link and you have all of our slides. Please, if any of you have more questions, please reach out to us. Also, we again have the interim findings, the second to last slide that I just shared with all of you. We're putting that out in a 5 to 6 page interim finding report in about a month. We're going to have some supporting webinars about that. If you email either Lisette or I, we'll put you on a mailing list and make sure that you see all the follow-up information as well. Lisette, any last words?
No.
So thanks, everybody. We are going to pass the baton to Michael DeVoe, who is just an incredible thinker, critical thinker about research within communities of color. And so we really want to, we're just really excited to enter into a conversation with him and just really talk about what research can be instead of all the failures of in what it has been in the past.
Am I live?
You are. We hear you.
Okay, okay. So first of all, I'm thankful to have been invited to this conversation. And in listening to your presentation, as far as I saw, did include what some people might think are actually evidence of having accomplished, and we'll just say something. What people are trying to understand is what is it that's really being accomplished, and how is this for some problematic? Well, I think a lot of the conversation when we think about what is evidence hinges upon an analysis of quantitative data. People just like to see numbers. And primarily, the number that people are interested in was whether or not a rates of recidivism have been reduced, as you've already said. Okay, that's only part of the story, and it also suggests that you're not saying that we're not trying to reduce rates of recidivism, but the question, as I always ask when rates of recidivism and all these numbers are brought up, is that all there is to it? For example, in my work with formerly incarcerated men, when you think about reducing recidivism, well, you can stay in the subway for 3 years and not be detected of having engaged in any type of wayward behavior. Is that success post-prison? Same issue here to some degree. One of the things that I thought about, during the conversation was first to, I guess, at one time, I worked as a program evaluator. And I know people are concerned about what will the funders think about what it is that we're actually doing. So there was an opportunity when I did some research when I was in Nigeria. And it was about the implementation of what they call the family life curriculum into schools. Generally, pre-test, post-test. It was a longitudinal study. Well, one of the questions that I think might help people understand the value of different other information informing success was to ask, have you ever had sex? And there were a percentage of some of the respondents that said yes. The follow-up question was, were you ever forced to have sex? A number, let's say about 80% of those that said they had sex said that they were forced to have sex. Now, I'm from New York. I'm from Harlem. And you're not receiving my video? I just received a message. Am I on or am I off?
I can see and hear you.
Okay, because I got some a message on the screen. So in asking the question, as a person not from that environment, when writing the report, I wrote that 85% of those people that said that they had sex said that they were forced to have sex. The point that I'm making is that the funders were relatively, confused and asked, was that true? Remember, this is a survey. They answered the question. They said yes. I wrote it up as if they had been raped. That's what it meant to me. Well, because we were questioned about what we had reported, we actually went back and conducted a focus group, a number of them, in order to collect additional information about what people meant, or if what they meant was how I had interpreted their yes and no's. That's not what they meant. They did not mean that they had been raped. What they meant were, because if you think of the place, the context in which the questions were asked, a very, poor environment. Some of them said that they were forced to have sex because they were poor. They needed to raise money for food and other issues. The point that I'm making is that often the numbers don't tell the story. And the people that are often doing the interpreting or providing an interpretation of the numbers are not from that environment. They don't have those same lived experiences. They don't really know what it is that the people mean when they check a box or answer a question. So this is the problem that I think often, takes place when we think about particularly quantitative data in particular. Often it unintentionally invalidates the experiences of those, in some instances, that these agencies intend to serve. And what it actually does is it enforces a silence upon them, literally silencing them, because their voices are not included, not only in the development of the research questions, the process of collecting the data, and analysis of the data, they're not included at all. And so what we need to understand is that in some research methodologies, there are inherent limitations that rather than making the presentation as full and as nuanced and as complete as possible, actually is problematic. As a result of this type of approach, the results of quantitative research may be, as has already been said, be statistically significant, which is another issue, but they may not be humanly significant. They may not mean anything. The numbers might suggest a certain degree of probability that these responses are not by chance, but often that doesn't mean anything, particularly to the people that are, as has also been talked about, research participants. And so the standard questions that are often asked, also, suggestive of structural biases, false representations of, what actually is attempting, and in a very limited sense, the people that this research is supposed to serve. It restricts them. It does not provide a lot of details about their behaviors. It doesn't provide details about their attitudes or their thinking or their motivations. Or this type of, numerical description, is rather limiting because there's no detail of the narrative or people given an opportunity to narrate what actually happens in their lives. The questions and the answers often reflect, the bias of the researchers. They come in as if they already know. And the evidence of their already knowing is the questions that they ask and the potential check this box responses that they provide. What these things also might reflect is their perceived hypotheses about what it is that they're expecting to find. So when we think about qualitative research, the emphasis seems to be different. Among the things that is important in thinking about qualitative research is that what it seeks to do, what it suggests, is that the people that are participating in the process, these are the people that are rich in knowledge rather than the researcher. And so what they need to be given is an opportunity to have their voices elevated rather than, subjugated or subjected or silenced or marginalized in the traditional way that people do research. There's no research that is actually value free. In all methods, there is some type of inherent bias. And that also needs to be understood. I've started off, with the example that we had, or the issue that we had with funders, because primarily that's what people are really, concerned about. Is this method going to get us some money? And so one of the questions that I have is, what are we afraid of in terms of often, programs and research, are not interested in empowering, people who have traditionally been conceived as being less than human, or people that have been described as animals, people that have been described as super predators. I mean, fear is a very, powerful emotion, and suggests in some instances that people are, really concerned about maintaining the status, empowering, or and I'll just leave it at, empowering those people that are being served. Among the approaches that, a lot of this traditional evidence-based research follows is, this dominant narrative of meritocracy, which in my estimation is a lie. If you encourage people to engage in the pulling up with their bootstraps, well, that's really impossible for people that don't have boots. So that type of what I'll call cultural imperialism, imposing of one's own cultural views on the people that the research is supposedly essentially designed to help is really not that helpful. It's like, for example, when we think of stories, I always have a problem, when we talk about stories or his story, because that's exactly what it is. It's the story told from the perspective of the people that won. For example, the story of a hunting expedition is quite different when it's being told by the hunter. We don't really get a truthful, a real depiction of what's actually being told, because the animals or, those that are being hunted, they would have a different understanding about what was going on. So as we think about, implicit biases, that are often included in a lot of the research that has been considered to be evidence, these generally include, negative associations about the people that are being served, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. And these things are expressed automatically, because these people are really responding from positions of privilege that often they may not be aware of. So, many studies have indicated that, this implicit bias, often affects individuals, their attitudes, their actions, thus creating a kind of worldview that is really antithetical to the worldview of the people that are actually, we think, are being helped. And so, it just suggests that a lot of these isms in our society often really not, things that we really want to talk about, you know what I mean, in terms of, racism, in terms of, gender discrimination, sexual orientation, age, religious biases, and other topics, But these things, I believe, are also implicit, in the research when it's done by, and we'll just say in this instance, outsiders. Among the things that I would suggest that is being offered in this particular approach by Angela and her colleagues is that there's an effort related to empowerment. Some people, I don't see a problem with the research that is actually being done, and perhaps would frame it and present it to, the funders as participatory action research, which you will talk a little bit about that, as we kind of wind this up. But we can see that, this lack of power is a universal kind of concept as it relates to the people that generally have been just as involved. A lot of their situations in terms of the reasons why, and this also has to be understood. Why do people get involved with so-called criminal behavior? What are some of the, crime causation theories that might suggest that the people, as has been said, themselves are not pathological, but the situation that they're finding themselves in, that's sick. You know what I mean? Why is there no focus on working to change the context within which decisions are being made? Often people make decisions because they often believe this is the only decision that they can make. And they have not had people, supportive people, that provide for them an alternative view of the context within which they have made those decisions. And so, when we think of what happens in situations in terms of marginalized people, they're generally, in a cycle of powerlessness. Their entire existence, a cycle wherein they have been stigmatized, a cycle, wherein, throughout their lives they have been discriminated. They have experienced, situations where they have been excluded from some of the milk and honey that we often think, is part of the American dream, and this type of treatment is often reinforced in the research in talking about them. So when we think about what this particular approach is doing, it is creating an opportunity for empowerment. Well, that word is often, slung around, and for some people, it really doesn't mean anything. But when I think about empowerment as it applies to myself, it's desiring to have the ability to exercise some type of control or influence over my own life. And often people feel that they lack that ability. Among the things that is also important is that this allows people an opportunity to lead themselves. It always begins with the self. I always say before you can command others, you got to be able to command yourself. And so it increases by the design belief. There's efficacy before agency. Often people have internalized their own helplessness, and they often believe that they can't do anything. And so this is an opportunity, related to personal empowerment, which, as I understand the process, it also leads to community empowerment. And so once the individual sees his relationship, and all this stuff is about relationships, with the community in which they live, that in and of itself can change the context within which some other person in that community might make a decision, such that it is an effort for that is centered in the context, the community. It is an effort that encourages and/or involves respect, mutual respect, where in relationships related to empowerment, there's an effort to rid hierarchies in the relationship. But one is better than, one is above than, one's knowledge is privileged above the other. It is an effort, to encourage all to engage in reflection, caring, which is, you can see that and I'm at a loss for the last names, but the two previous presenters, Angela, one of the things that you see in the whole, in their effort is care. They're genuinely concerned about the people that they're actually working with, which also, suggests that, this is a kind of a revolutionary concept. But when you think of revolutionary concepts, one of the language of revolutionary concept includes love. There's a genuine love and concern for the people involved in the research, because they themselves are those same people. And one of the things that, the system in which we live, it discourages a love for self. And so when people begin to show love for themselves, love is a very, very powerful motivator. And so, this research reflects, this kind of caring. It reflects this kind of group participation. It reflects, an attitude where people are valued and all this kind of thing. And so it is a process wherein, people begin to gain some kind of control over their lives that they never, may not have experienced in the past. It reflects a kind of, and I'll say it this way, a kind of democratic kind of a participation in their own lives, developing some different understanding about, their environment. And what it also does, it encourages them not to internalize the negative things that, that have been said about them. I call this, internalized oppression. When you begin to internalize these negative labels, then one makes it a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And so this particular approach, that the EBP plus, I believe, demonstrates all these elements. And so I think what's also important in this EBP plus is that it values the world view of the people that are actually being served. And one of the questions that I always ask, whether it's irrespective of the agency, is how do they, because the way you think about people is clearly going to influence how you interact with them. If you can't, as a service provider, come from the other side of the desk, which is generally a battery, which suggests that you and I are not the same, which is a tangible indication that one is othered, then you're not really, to me, in my opinion, it's just a perpetuation of the same situation that a lot of these people, myself included, have been going through their entire lives. And so in thinking about, I'm thinking of what's being done as a kind of participatory action research, which has, the functional purpose of allowing the people to both design the research, to design the questions, as it says, the collective ownership of the data. They are themselves participating, in an analysis of the data, equal partners in the data, and it's also empowering, wherein they can utilize these the information and themselves, apply it to their own situations for the intentional purpose of, empowering themselves, empowering their organizations, and also empowering their communities. And so I guess the best thing we could add is just to say that, in the end, there are all kinds of ways of doing research. This particular piece seems to is intent, not seems to, but it is intent on elevating the voices of those that are being served in the process at every stage as equal stakeholders. And why not? Because in actuality, it's their lives that are at stake. And so I think that this is one of the more appropriate methods in utilizing research to empower both the individual, the organization, and the community. And so, I'm just looking at I think I had a note here to suggest to myself that if people are working together, this particular approach to develop an analysis of their own lived experience, a lot of people don't really understand what happened. And often that's the question to ask when people have, experienced repeated trauma throughout their lives. What happened? Tell me the story about, what happened, because in doing so, it allows them to engage in an analysis of their lived experiences in a very, in a manner which it allows them to get it outside of themselves. Again, rather than to internalize and to pathologize themselves, is to look at the situation and suggest that anybody having these same experiences may have, we expect, similar outcomes. There's nothing wrong with you, which is one of my issues with the cognitive behavior therapy piece, because it suggests that there's something wrong, there's something pathological about the folk that we're trying to serve. No, there's nothing wrong with the people. The situation that the people find themselves in, that's the problem. And what can we do about that? So I think there may be, I really know how much time we have left, but I think that's enough to kind of give us something, I guess, to think about. And if there's some questions that maybe, had from the group, I think this might be a good time to kind of stop there.
That was amazing.
Hello. How you doing? Thank you, everyone. We will be going on a 10-minute break. It's 3:25, so we'll be going on a break until 3:35. But if you have any question, please hang on to them, because then when we come back, it's question and answer time. Thank you.
See you in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I don't know how I'm going to go. So, can you still hear me? Yeah, I can't hear you.
I was muted.
Okay, so with that in mind, some of the thinking.
That was perfect.
So that was reason to stop. Y'all just reaction research. You know what I mean? That's the nature of research. muted. All right.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to welcome back Lizette, Mikhail, and Angela. If you have any questions, now is the time to spew your questions. I see that we had 3 questions from the audience. What are the circumstances of the people? What are the circumstances of the people studied are? What are the circumstances that people are being studied?
That
was for, I guess.
Do you mean like what systems were they involved in?
That was a question from Harriet. Harriet, can you reissue your question? Yes, we are using the chat, everyone. To submit your questions, please use the chat. So we had a few questions. Who does the research actually serve? Who is implicitly designed to serve, or what interests? So those were 2 of the questions.
The research was designed to measure outcomes for youth that were being served by these originally 12 organizations, and it's now fewer organizations. And those young people are definitely involved in the justice system, but they also are usually impacted by other systems as well. So school discipline, child welfare. So we just recognize that youth in one system are usually impacted by many systems, and our age range is very broad. We surveyed every young person under, sometimes up to the age of 24, 25, down to however young youth are that are being served by these organizations. And the time range between pre and post participation ranged because all of the different organizations serve youth. Some organizations serve youth in structured curricula, and others we need to survey every quarter or every 6 months to make sure that we're getting regular time periods. So it may be true that more exact analysis will yield findings about sort of an ideal length of time to be served, but these findings are based on very broad, a very broad range of length of time served.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So the next question is, did you have to take any special steps to include protected populations?
Do you mean institutional review board approvals?
Possibly. This question is from Mr. Eric Weaver.
Eric, do you mean for institutional review board?
We'll wait for him to reply. Thank you, Angela. So Harriet said, this question is for, sorry, he replied. He said yes. Angela.
Since this is a program evaluation, we are, we basically have an exemption, an IRB exemption. None of the youth that we surveyed were in institutional or secure facilities, so we didn't have to worry about that. All these young people are being served in the community.
Thank you. And Mikhail, this question is for you. Harriet, Professor Goodman says, can you say more about what you mean when you said the people have won?
So basically, I was drawing an analogy in terms of why I prefer stories of the past rather than history. When we talk about history, history is really not a rendition of what happened. It's a version, and it's generally told by the people that won. For example, in this instance, like, the story that we have heard about Christopher Columbus was told about people that, it's not the same story that may have been told by the indigenous people about that experience. So that's what I mean by the people that won. Often we get this, for example, the same thing when talking about quantitative, often quantitative approaches. The researcher knows what questions to ask. The researcher provides the answers that the participant is to pick from. That in and of itself suggests some bias. It may not be what the people that the research is designed to help. Might not be a question that's interesting to them. The responses there may not have anything to do with their own lived experiences. It's often the same problem when we experience with standardized tests and IQ tests. These things often speak about a cultural context that are alien to the people that are taking a test. How can they do well, on an examination that does not speak to their lived experience? So that's basically what I mean. The framing of the research does not include and I'll say it this way, the research participants, as they say, they often call them human subjects and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It doesn't include, their input is not included.
And the other part of the question is, can you say more about how those winners shape the research?
Well, again, think of the example that I began with in terms of when I asked the question, have you ever had sex? Have you ever been forced to have sex? I wrote it up based on how I interpreted, the response. They just checked yes. And I wrote this narrative that did not relate to their experiences. Well, I interpreted the data with my understanding about what it was that they meant, which had nothing to do with them, which is another indication that, I was imposing my view of their response, which had nothing to do with them. And often that's what people do. The data don't speak. It's how the data are interpreted. That's what people read. You can look at these numbers, but you say what they mean, meaning the researcher says what the numbers mean, may not be what the people that answered the question were actually trying to suggest. So in that regard, yes, they do influence the outcome because they're the ones that are providing the interpretation of the numbers.
Could I add something? Oh, so just right as we were ending the last half of the presentation, Mikhail, you said this is like, our research is like participatory action research. And I think that there's some really interesting comparisons that I think about a lot. And you also drew a comparison between quantitative and qualitative research. And, I think that of course, like there's something about a survey that's always going to be reductionist anyway, right? It's not going to tell a full story. And we as a collaborative are trying to think of ways, like we're going to do an audio storytelling project where young people are going to talk about their experiences, and we're going to try to experiment with that. But I also think that I just want to put it out there, and I don't know what you think about this, but sometimes academic participatory action research is still extractive in some ways, in the sense of qualitative researchers still coming in with short-term relationships and then leaving, and then like maybe publishing about what their experience was, but the people that were like gave their ideas aren't publishing. And what I love about this is I'm sure there are ways that we can continue to grow and learn, but I feel like we were trying to be really, really intentional about being a collaborative from the very beginning, where no one was identified. And one of the big lessons I just want to talk about is one of our members is, again, Albino Garcia down in New Mexico. And Malachi and I had this idea that we would come in and create this collaborative, and then we would facilitate, but then the direct service organizations would take over governance and we would step back. And so Lizette, the meeting that Lizette came to in Oakland was sort of this big meeting where we were going to say, okay, let's talk about governance. Malachi and Angela are going to step back. And Albino, as we were having that discussion, Albino stopped the conversation and he said, wait a minute, like just this conversation feels so hierarchical to me. Like the fact that you came in and that you have the choice to step out, and he said, it reminds me of the Kellogg Foundation. There was somebody at the Kellogg Foundation that talked about recruitment and abandonment, that even consultants have this power to facilitate and create something and then disappear and let all the messiness behind, leave all the messiness behind. And so he said to us both, he said, either you're in or you're out. Like you're either a part of the collaborative or you're not a part of the collaborative. And I learned so much because our intention was, look, you're the direct service organizations, you should be privileged, right? But it was like, no, I have to even rethink that. Like I'm bringing my research knowledge, but everybody else is bringing their, like everybody has something to give at the table. So anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about that.
I mean, but that's a good point. But it's everyone reconceptualizes themselves. For example, in a learning environment, there is no student and teacher. So everybody has to redefine themselves, in terms of, like, for example, I say teacher learner. We can learn from each other. That's what that's what we're there for. So, the fact that you're staying shows commitment. You know what I mean? Rather than, y'all go ahead and figure this out. So one's presence means something. If the presence is constructed in a way that mirrors, I'll say, this Ashanti proverb: I am because we are, and we are because I am. We are connected. We need each other. And so, once people can feel that, because it's about relationship, then they can trust you. You know what I mean? They know that, no, we are in this together. Because that's the language, that is the language of empowerment: collaboration, co-conspirators. You know what I mean? For some, that's dangerous talk. Some people want those that don't know to never know. They want people that don't believe to never believe. And that's why I'd rather say, rather than history, stories of the past. Because here's what the difference. When you know your story, you know what you have done. You know what you're capable of doing. When you don't know your story, somebody's going to tell you a story about you that's really has nothing to do except for keeping you in a particular place. You know what I mean? So, we don't want to hear his story. We want our kind of collective, we want to know our story. And so part of what you're doing is facilitating the voice. People, have been silenced for so long, they've forgotten how to speak. You know what I mean? And so, you're not doing anything except for facilitating self-determination, facilitating the restoration of autonomy, countering learned helplessness that people, often in the context that we're talking about have internalized. You're facilitating, different conceptions regarding locus of control, where people may think, no matter what I do, it's not going to make a difference. Oh, hell no. Do something and see, it will make a difference. Like the effort is really in the trying. You know what I'm saying? Because people have been told that no matter what you do, it won't make a difference. But that's the lie that people want you to believe, people in positions of power. Because what they're trying to do is to maintain the status quo or the position that they're in. And that's why we're asking, what are they so afraid of? Why all these efforts? And I make this kind of connection, you know what I mean? Voter suppression. What is, because all this stuff is connected. Why don't they want us engaged in the governing of our own affairs? Why don't they want us to be active participants in the empowerment of our own communities? What is this really all about? It's more than just, this whole notion of, you don't want to see you go back to jail. No, you want to consign me to a permanent underclass. That's what a lot of these other objectives are that we're not really talking about. You don't even want me to vote. You know what I mean? So once you start getting people engaged in their own communities where they live, that can make a difference. You know what I mean? So that's why I said I saw it. Of course there's always pluses and minuses regarding all types of approaches. One of the words I was going to talk about was triangulation and stuff like that. Where you got both of these methods, a mixed methods kind of approach. But I think that part of the effort here is really about empowerment. It's about getting people to believe in themselves, that they can make a difference. And so we understand how people have internalized these negative ideas. Well, listen, I know I went to the school of the oppressor, elementary school, junior high school, college, master's degree 1, over here master's degree, PhD. I have learned well from my oppressor. I'm in the business right now, unlearning. You know what I'm saying? A lot of that stuff that they taught me, I gotta let go. When I went in the sociology, master's degree sociology, all the deviants look like me. Hold on. I'm not that bad of a person. You know what I'm saying? So I had, we have to reconceptualize ourselves and not see ourselves the way those that don't think of us highly see ourselves. We need to be engaged in the validation of ourselves. And that's what the collaborative does. It facilitates that kind of validation. You know what I mean? That sense of self that some people have never had. So that's what I was thinking in terms of, there's a lot going on in participatory types of research, if it's done correctly, so that's my take on it.
Yeah. I wanna feed off of that, Mikhail, because oftentimes when I remember being that student in that classroom, right? And we're reading about the other, right? And you find yourself in that position where you're like, whoa, I'm reading about myself. I'm reading about my family. I'm reading about my community. I am the other, and when you are the other in a room of people who are looking at you as the other, it's an opportunity to check people, right? Because it's like, this is not for me some mythical situation. This is like real life. And, it's important to kind of like remind folks that we are here, right? And we are present and we are part of this process. And it's not about doing research about the other. It's like being part of the process from the beginning. So that resonates. Thank you.
Now, of course. Let me contain myself. And that's why, see, you bring to the process even a different spirit. You know what I mean? This ain't really about some number crunching. You understand really what's at stake here. There are lives at stake. And when the stakes, reach that level, then, the approach is entirely different. Right. You're not here to hustle bodies. You know what I mean? That's not what you're in the business of doing. You know what I mean? You're trying to some degree, resurrect the dead, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because people, like, I look at it this way. People have been trying to kill us from day one. They kill us with the numbers. They kill us at every turn. They silence your voice. They don't even allow you to say anything. That's not what you're trying to do here.
Right. And I'm sorry, Lizette, that leads me into the next question from David. What is the next step in getting funders aware and understanding of this perspective?
I think there were also some questions ahead of there that were talking about how can people uncover their own successes that are already in place, and then the funder place. And I don't. I'm happy to speak to that first, and then have other people jump in. I think that first of all, everyone on this call should not feel like you are not the experts of your own experience, right? I think that if you if it would help to have somebody come in and facilitate a conversation about what you think you do best, then you can always do that. But you can also always have internal conversations and pull everybody into a room and say, what do we do best? What are we doing? What are we providing to our community? And what impact do we have in 1 to 2 years? And how does that impact our community in 5 to 10 years? Just 3 different columns, and have that conversation, and then think about, okay, once we know what we think we're impacting, then how can we possibly measure it? That's what we do when we're brought in to assist organizations. But you can think about doing it yourself. But I do want to say that we are facing a huge uphill battle in convincing funders and legislators that this approach is valuable. I think that there are funders that feel what it, they hear EBP plus, they hear us talking, it feels good, they want to, there has been an investment in money, and the evaluators at those foundations, the researchers of those foundations are asking for the statistically significant findings, blah, blah, blah. But I do think that there are a couple of things. I think Lizette talking about, and Mikael, what you were just saying about, we're not just we're talking about communities, and we're not just trying to quantify and measure people, right? That's why we basically took a break for a year and said, okay, people are literally dying, and we have to just stop the research, and we just have to support each other so that we can continue to care for our communities. The care came first, and the impact of that, of caring for each other, created the deepest roots in our collaboration, right? And the deepest, an even deeper love for each other, and an even deeper commitment to the work. And I feel like with any movement building theory, we have to be honest about what the power dynamics are. And we have to get ready to fight that, right? And expand our collaborative, expand our movement, expand our network, and be strategic about how can we show that this type of knowledge is more powerful and more meaningful and more real. Of course, this is going to be more threatening to power, right? It's there's a reason that traditional research is superficial. There's a reason that traditional research only uncovers superficial programs and interventions that don't actually change anything, right? But I think research can be a piece of dramatic social change if we're strategic about it. But Lizette, do you want to add anything about what your experience has been, and add to what I said?
Yeah, when I saw that question in terms of how do you uncover the already existing evidence of success and not focus on the deficits, I feel that in our approach when we're working with young people, when you have a goal to reach, it's really focusing not on what you don't have, but what do you have, what is in your arsenal, right, to achieve that goal? What are your strengths? And really helping young people to tap into those strengths and translating how those strengths translate into them achieving their goals. So we're not focusing on the fact that, you haven't finished school and you haven't, achieved that goal. Well, what is in your arsenal? What is in your tool belt right now that you can access, right? Is traditional school for you? Where do you feel like you could thrive and focus your efforts and your energy, and really focusing on what strengths do these young people bring to the table, as opposed to looking at that deficit model. And that to me is where the evidence of success will become obvious when you engage in that dialogue with young people, and translating that to funders is not always the easiest thing to do. But if you focus on that strength and what they bring to the table, that kind of shifts the balance.
Yeah, I think one of the things to do is just what we're doing. You know what I mean? You organize the meetings and you talk to people, and you expose them to, these different ideas and alternative ways of thinking about things. Nothing that you're talking about is foreign to people that are engaged in research. It's just, what are people's priorities? And so, often people have this kind of person-centered kind of approach. When you focus on the individual, you don't have to do anything about the context within which those situations emerge. And so when you think about empowerment, you can't just empower the individual without trying to have some impact on the organization and the community. It's, for example, and I haven't done this, and I pray that I never get it. Well, suppose I get the COVID joint. You quarantine me, and then you send me back outside where everybody's got COVID. If you don't do anything about that environment, I'm gonna catch the virus again. So, that's what I'm saying. This approach is not a person-centered type of approach. You know what I mean? Of course, you want to address the immediate needs that the individual has had. You want to accent, you know what I mean? That which is positive and good, because that which is negative is what people have been told all their lives. You're bad. You're no good. All these negative identities. I have a host of negative identities based on other people. Number one, I'm black. You understand? I'm starting out on the wrong foot, according to some people. You look black up in the dictionary. Just look it up in the dictionary, and you see the negative connotations that have been associated with just that. So it's again, like, for example, we talk about social construction of reality. People need to work to construct an environment that is of benefit to them. You can't live in an environment that has been constructed by people that, have designed this thing to keep you in a particular place. That's part of, and so as was mentioned, I think it was Ms. Irvin, about a social justice kind of framework. It's kind of seeing all of the injustices, all of the inequality, all of the unfairness in how people have been instructed, their entire existence, all the trauma that people have experienced. When do we seek, to engage in, that kind of transformative, transformation, that kind of healing? If the environment remains sick, of course people are going to get infected, but you can't blame the child that is poor because they were born in that kind of environment. And that's what often people do. You impute blame, find fault with the person who basically, is in a context that they did not create. And so, that's, someone asked about racism, all the isms, all the systemic issues of oppression, all the privilege that has contributed to the situation that the people that we're trying to help happen to find themselves in. They didn't create that kind of situation. All the isms, all the racisms, all the oppression, all these, things that complicate, their justice involvement. Again, when you think of like crime causation theories, rational choice, the people think about whether they can get away, this, that, and the third, consequences, et cetera, et cetera. Often people make decisions where they believe that that's the only decision that they can make. And among the things that you're providing, and even this conversation, is another way of even just looking at things, that perhaps they might never have thought of before. So when you begin to expose people to different ways of conceptualizing things, that in and of itself is powerful.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to say, I feel like these conversations are so important. I think that one of the ways that the Credible Messenger Network has been so successful is developing relationships with each other and having a network and sharing successes and being in communication with each other. And I think, we're the EBP Plus folks are hoping to also expand our relationship. So, we're looking, any of those that are interested in maintaining a relationship with us, please reach out. So Ruben.
I wanted to address a question that said, from Harriet, that said, how can you convince funders that these non-traditional methods are important? I guess I see that question directly related to our collaborative, right? Because, one of the things that we are trying to, I guess the message that we want to send is that we are a collective of organizations all using what I would say is considered non-traditional methods. And we are using, that value as a collective to demonstrate, through this research that, that our methods are effective by designing our own tools, right? Our tools, it's like, because the reality of the matter is the research doesn't stop, when that survey is completed, right? Like, that's not like, oh, well, you did your pre-survey, you did your post-survey, and these are our results, right? Like, it's just an indicator. But, we continue to do that work with the young people and their families and their community. Like, I remember one of the things that Mikhail said in his presentation, right? Like, if you can impact the young person, that young person can have an impact on the community. But that young person can also have an impact on their immediate community, which is their family, right? And at CCXY, part of that approach is you're not working just with the young people, right? Because it's like you said, if you just focus on that young person and they go back into an environment that is like not really serving their interests and not really like addressing the issues that they're having at home, then how are we really helping that young person, navigate, all the different aspects of their lives? So that, like, for us, that is the whole purpose of existing, having this collaborative, showing that, like, this ain't a one organization approach. This is a multi, a collaborative that represents multiple non-traditional approaches, and we are using that like collective power to demonstrate, that this is evidence-based plus, and that plus action, the community, and our role in making those changes and making those and showing, like, that these approaches work.
So check this out. One of the things that's interesting is that, this is an effort that's being engaged in different parts of the country. In different parts of the country, we are seeing the same systemic issues. The challenge that you guys are mounting are actually a challenge against this system, against oppression, against, the poverty, against, all these isms that increase the likelihood that someone is going to make a decision that will facilitate justice involvement some kind of way. Well, why would you not work on, it reminds me of, I guess I'll call him a friend, a guy named Steve Burkhardt, teaches at the Silverman School of Social Work, wrote this book, and I got the book here, Macro Practice of Social Work for the 21st Century. I don't know if you guys see that. Well, one of the interesting pieces in there was that y'all trying to step y'all game up. Y'all tired of playing jacks. Checkers ain't really what you got to do. You're trying to play chess now, wherein there is a strategy to address these issues that you cannot use the same approach that has been used in the past. You gonna get the same results. So his chapter on moving from checkers to chess was really about organizing, within the self. The individual has to get organized. As you said, it goes from every other aspect of that environment. the family, community at large, and basically, you're trying to check this system that continues to feed off of these bodies. So that's how I see it. It's what you're doing is on a local thing, but it's also an effort to address, ideology as well. These logical challenges. That's why I was saying, that whole notion of pull yourself up by the bootstraps, yeah, that works when you got boots.
What I wanted to, Ruben asked a question about what if there are organizations that adopt the outcomes that we're interested in, but don't change how they hire and promote, and in particular, lifting up the leadership of those who are system impacted, and particularly justice system impacted. And if we disentangle those two things, I want to encourage everybody to think about outcomes in a different way. We want everybody to think about strength-based outcomes, but you can't take the who away from the what in this model. Again, the central tenet is the plus is us. That means the reason that this is successful, the reason that we're arguing that this particular approach is successful, is that it centers the leadership of those Black and brown leaders from Black and brown communities that are system impacted. And you can't, it's like you can't be a credible messenger unless you have lived the life, right? And you can't have an evidence-based practice plus organization unless you lift impacted leaders up to the center. Lizette, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or Miguel.
I was just saying, well, what's the problem with doing that? And see, that's the problem. People that think that that's problematic, that's the problem. You know what I mean? And that's why I asked, what are you afraid of? What's so threatening about treating other people like they people? You understand? Like they're people just like you. What is that really all about? Well, this is really what it's all about. Because the challenge is definitions and notions of white supremacy. That's what the problem is. You know what I mean? It's not white people that are problematic. It's white supremacy that's problematic, and the systems that emerge from that particular ideology. Because here it is, you're talking about, for the most part, Black and brown people, but they're poor white people too. You know what I mean? That are having these issues. You know what I mean? But that often don't see that they're in the same boat. You know what I mean? In terms of people that are in positions of power and how they interact and treat those that are not. So there are systemic things that we're trying to take a look at, in addition to dealing with an individual. You know what I mean? And the issues that an individual might be experiencing. It's the context, and as you say, who else could model success, or who could model success better than a person who's had that experience? Because that's what, that's credible. I can believe in you. You know me. You are me. So that in and of itself is, like, for example, people know me when I was in prison. They're still in prison. It's inspiring. Oh, Mick, I see you. You make it seem like, I could do something. You know what I mean? It facilitates their own belief about themselves when they see themselves in a positive way. So I don't see how you can eliminate the plus, because the plus is part of the evidence. That is the evidence. And so, Dave asked the question, do you need to convene funders? Yeah, why not? You know what I mean? Because you're trying to educate them about different, and I hate to say different, but ways of looking at things that they were not perhaps familiar. You know what I'm saying? But it's not different. It's just that you're just not familiar with this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, to elaborate, Miguel, like, in reference to Ruben's question about like organizations that are not willing to, bring directly impacted people to the table then you need to like take a look and take stock. And when you take a look and take stock and you ready to come to the table, like seriously engaging the community you serve, then come back to us. But like if there's a resistance, they need to look at that resistance. That's not that's not for us to work out. That's for them to work out. When you work that out, come back to the table, I guess is the way I see it.
Yeah, because that's not your problem. You know
Exactly.
That's not my problem. That's your problem. And until you can engage in that kind of reconciliation, and that's why I say white supremacy, right? White supremacy presupposes black inferiority or the inferiority of people of color. And so, when people when that is part of their lived experience, they're not so easily willing to kind of give that up because you're challenging their privilege. It's like this here. And perhaps they don't see it. It's like the little fish said to the big fish, what's this ocean you keep talking about? And the big fish said to the little fish, when you get out, you'll see. So unless they're able to come out of that, that cocoon that they've been living in, that have kind of privileged and shielded them from this reality that people have been experiencing their entire lives, they're never going to see it. There's one thing to be anti-racist, to be a non-racist. Another thing to be anti-racist. To be anti-racist means you have to engage in the process of undoing this stuff, of deconstructing this stuff. And that's what people have to be willing to do. Because they'll say, I'm not racist. My butler is black. The guy that drives my car is black. I got some black friends. Yeah, okay. That's very nice. But, what is that going to do about this, these structural things that we've been talking about?
And undoing racism, I think, it's like how it's not just like you said, it's not like being polite. It's not thinking, okay, like this formerly incarcerated guy is like good enough to be the ED of my, the organization I'm on the board of. It's like, no, like what are you doing to decenter yourself? Like white people as leaders have failed over and over and over again. We have to decenter ourselves and let the community leaders who are leaders of their own communities show us how it's done.
So, just again, what is it that is feared when people seek to empower those who have traditionally been conceptualized as being less than human, as being described, as I said earlier, animals and super predators? What's the problem with seeing people as people? You see what I'm saying? That's part of the issue here. When people are opposed to, and it's kind of funny that the people have to even be given permission to lead themselves. You know what I mean? Because when privileges is granted, when you get tired of me, you're going to take it away. And so this is an effort to encourage people not to ask for permission. You know what I mean? Like Douglas said, power concedes to nothing, if you don't step up and take it. When you continue to rely on those that are in power to give you a little something, you're really not changing the power dynamic. And that's what you initially started talking about, these power relationships. Part of the work is undoing that, so that's what people are afraid of. You know what I mean? Changing the relationship as is. Because that's what I keep asking. What's the problem here? Particularly when, people have qualified themselves to speak. I mean, like I said, I done went to all the oppressor schools. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, I got my PhD from Oppressor University. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, but, okay. The thing, because we used to always ask this question, okay, so what? What are you going to do, where you came from? What kind of conversation, because, being black don't mean you right either. Or at least on the, having that thing on the outside. You know what I mean? It's like Franz Fanon, black skin, white mask. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. You know what I mean? These are ideological things that we're also trying to address. And, even though a lot of the emphasis is on race, there are other, aspects as well, intersectionality, gender, and all that other kind of stuff as well. So, it's basically, when you think of critical criminology, it's the oppressed, those that are being oppressed. And we're trying to, disentangle, like, for example, I always say this here. To play this game, it takes two, the oppressor and the oppressed. When you refuse to engage in that dance, and this is the oppressed people, when they refuse to play that game, that's a game changer. When you can define yourself rather than allowing others to define you, when you exercise personal autonomy and self-determination, that's a game changer, And so part of this facilitation is, again, to get people to believe, no, you have the power to do that. You have been, like I say, we have learned well in these schools, you know what I mean? Providing people, authority over ourselves that are really not deserved. But we've been taught that, you know what I mean? And so we're learning anew. That's how I look at it. And I don't have to be right. That's just, and so long as we understand things that way, this is how I see it. This is part of my experience. And in my experience is just as valid as anybody else's. And so that's what people have to learn to believe, that you are good enough. You are just as valuable, which again is turning off these negative tapes that you see in the media. Everywhere you look, for example, I had a professor once, none that I've recently had, used to ask me, why are you always talking all this black stuff? And so the woman used to talk about the safaris she used to go on. So I said, so how did you feel when the chief wanted to give you a bunch of cows for your daughter? They was feeling her head. How did you feel when the airplane pilot was black? The postman was black. The pilot, everybody, you know what I mean? You did not see yourself. How did that make you feel? So, the effort here is to kind of, resist internalizing this helplessness, which, like they call it, learn helplessness. You know what I mean? You suggest that no, we can do more than just be victims of the system. I don't know. But I mean, it's just a way of framing what it is you're actually doing. You're not just doing research. This is a tool that you're using, to facilitate empowerment, self-determination, autonomy, in your own affairs. Take charge of your life. You can do this. And once people start believing, look out. You understand what I'm saying? You look out. There's efficacy before agency. Once you start believing, I can do this. I hate to get excited, you know what I mean? But that's what it is.
Thank you, Mikhail. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Lizette. Thank you, Angela. We have approximately 7 minutes left. So I'm just one last call for any questions. About 4:27, I'm going to wrap it up. I dropped Angela and Lizette's email in the chat. Mikhail, would you like me to drop yours as well?
Yeah, we'll say that what? My email?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Put my email in the chat?
Yes. Thank you. And is there any last questions? I see we have one here from Harriet. She said, this is for you, Mikhail. Do you see your students animated by the issues discussed here? Good question.
Oh, yeah. So currently, I'm doing work at Nassau Community College and at John Jay. And I believe that some of the things that we've said, they've never heard before. And the mere fact that we're not talking the same old yak, that in and of itself gives they get excited. And I'll say on the low, you get these side emails, yo, how can I get that same kind of attitude? And I say this, you matter. But at the end of the semester, That's one thing I cannot get you to believe. But when you start to believe that you matter, you're going to act like it. You know what I mean? You're not going to accept a lot of these things that have been intolerable. You're going to break out of this thinking that no matter what you do, it won't make a difference. No, what you do will make a difference once you start doing something. You know what I mean? So sometimes, you know, we, and I hate to say it this way, but in its context, you know, I tell them, you can do this. All you got to do is try. The success is in the effort. Because if you don't try, you're not going to succeed. But long as you just make some kind of effort, you'll see that you've won. So yeah. So when I have class, you know, I come to class to have fun. But I say I'm having fun, but I'm not playing. You know what I mean? And so we enjoy ourselves. We get excited. I get excited. I mean, the way I'm talking now, that's how I do my little classes and stuff like that. You know, we cover the little points and stuff, whatever's in the little textbook. But listen, everybody can read. So I don't have to give you a blow-by-blow about what's in the textbook. We can talk about how do we use this information in order to better our situation. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think they're animated, excited, you know what I'm saying? Because no one ever talks to them, you know, like we on the same level. You know, I begin the class and say, listen, I'm here to learn from you. You know what I mean? So you got to reconceptualize yourself. You're not just a student. Your lived experience informs how I need to hear from you. That's how I learn. So, you know, you do what you can in every situation to rid the hierarchy in the relationship as best you can. They already know that you're the professor. They already know that you got a PhD. You ain't got to rub that in nobody's face. What else do you have that can be of some benefit to me besides the fact that you got A, B, C, D, all kinds of degrees? You know, that don't mean nothing to these people. So I know that's kind of a long answer, but the short answer is yes.
Tiffany, there was another question in the chat from Amelia.
Yes.
Did you see that question?
No, I did not.
Okay,
Let
it
me
says,
see.
were there other tools of measurement beyond the survey, focus group interviews, secondary data, observational data? Was it all participant reported, or were any staff involved in what they were witnessing and experiencing?
Do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, please.
You want me to or you?
Yeah, can you answer?
Okay, yeah. We did do observations. We did 5 site visits, and then we're doing this audio storytelling project where we're collecting stories from youth before the release of our next report. And then we as a collaborative we'll continue to do the surveys. We needed to get that in place, but we're going to continue to experiment with collecting knowledge and sharing knowledge. We're going to try to put together a webinar series where we have ongoing conversations. So again, anybody who's interested in just learning more about our reports, potentially becoming part of the network, reach out to either Lizette or I, and we'll make sure that you are notified about everything that comes up.
Okay.
I just want to say one quick thing to punctuate what Mikhail was saying. I feel like it's radical thought is oppressed in so many different contexts, right? Oppressor university, right? And it's on purpose in some ways. And it's so important to tell students or your employees or anybody around you, encourage new thought, encourage radical thought. And don't let those young people or your peers or anybody with that radical thought be afraid. Just be your fullest self and have the faith that you will find somebody else who's also living their fullest self, and you can start to build those relationships. And then your network is 2, and then it's 4, and then it's 8, and then you know, once that network is 20, you have the power to make huge change. And so stepping, you know, thinking outside of the box and thinking new thoughts and thinking the most, you know, like crazy, what you think is just the craziest radical thought, you know, we need all of that to make the change that we need. So
let me say one thing too, you know, there was a time in this country when dissent, Boston Tea Party, all that kind of stuff was considered radical, you know? But dissent is the norm. They just don't want the people that don't have power to dissent. They want the people that don't have power just to go along with stuff. You know what I mean? Once they, and see, this is one thing I'll say for myself. One of the things that we must guard against is becoming that which we say we hate the most. You know what I mean? Because, you know, we have learned well. And so we need each other to check each other when we start getting all uppity, when we start, you know what I mean? When the head starts swelling. And only we can do that for each other.